Thanks. All right. I am so happy and so excited to introduce Erin Kate Ryan, who is also a longtime friend of my colleague and co-host, Maria Accardi. So thank you, Maria, for basically getting the ball rolling on all of this. So I'm going to say just a few brief words, Erin Kate, that are included in your About the Author in your book, and then I'm going to let you take it away. So Erin Kate Ryan's fiction has been published in VQR, Glimmer Train, The Normal School, and elsewhere. She is a James Jones First Novel Fellow and a McKnight Artist Fellow. She holds an MFA in fiction from the Bennington Writing Seminars, where she was an alumni fiction fellow and lives in the Hudson Valley with her partner and found family. And with that, Erin Kate, I'm gonna send it over to you. She looks confused.
Thank you very much, Courtney. I'm really excited to be doing this event. I'm very self-conscious about how big my face has to be to everyone in the library. If there's something going on, please feel free to drop it into the chat so I know. I am good friends with Maria Accardi. We went to high school together in Kentucky. So we've been friends for a long time, 30 years. And I grew up not far from where you are now, just about 90 minutes away or so. The book that I'm going to be doing the reading from, Quantum Girl Theory, was inspired by the real life disappearance of a college sophomore from Bennington College in 1946. And she put on a bright red parka, left her dorm room, and she was never seen again. And when she disappeared, her absence caught the attention of the newspapers. She was the Gabby Petito for 1946. Her coverage of her disappearance was everywhere. They were stopping random blonde girls as far away as Washington State and Puerto Rico to see if they happened to be Paula Jean Weldon. And I was really interested in that fact and the way that Paula Jean herself seemed to disappear from the story. And the story became instead about the search for her. So each chapter of Quantum Girl Theory imagines a life she may have lived after she disappeared, which means that I can jump right into the middle of the book and read you from any part. So since this is National Library Week, and because I think that the Creativity Club in particular would be interested in the ideas of who owns art, what is our relationship, our identity, and how is that in relationship to the things that we make and the things that we create. I am going to read a particular chapter called Ghostwriter. And all of these chapters kind of spin out from some of the newspaper articles I found when I was doing my research. So I kind of show you here the images that are used at the beginning of this chapter. In particular, a newspaper article I found, which I'll just read. Boston police clue Peters out. Michael Houlihan, lieutenant of the Boston Police Department, called the Banner this morning at 2:30 with a report that the following want ad was running in the Boston Traveler newspaper. Bennington College student available for part-time work, January, February, and March. Lieutenant Houlihan said that the return address attached to the ad was Virginia Butler, Box 9758. When informed of this development, President Jones of the college informed the Banner that no such student was being carried on the roll of the college at this time. 2 18-year-old girls were being held Tuesday night at the office of the Traveler's Aid in LaSalle Station in Boston. However, it was determined that the 2 girls were from North Adams and had no known connection with the case of Paula Weldon. So the book kind of assumes that all of the newspaper articles are wrong, but perhaps have a glancing relationship to the truth. And so I think in this section that I read, some of that will become clear. North Adams, Massachusetts, 1996. In Virginia Butler's first book, a girl goes missing from her boarding school. It's 1916, and the girl climbs to the top of a hill in her drab school uniform and burrows deep into the earth using only her fingers. Inside the hill, the girl builds herself an underground palace with tree roots for a hammock and a bouquet of lightning bugs for a lantern. She can make it rain with the right tug on the tulip bulbs, and if she presses on the embedded stones, boulders rise from the ground like standing figures to shadow the valley. In the story, the girl is free and she is God. Paula Jean read that book in high school, lying on her stomach on the dirt floor of an old boys' camp. Wise, who had pressed the book into Paula Jean's hands in the first place, lay on her back beside Paul, smoking a cigarette with her blouse unbuttoned, shoulder pressed against Paul's arm. Over time, that old camp cabin in the woods became their burrow away from the rest of the world, where they were free and they were gods. And then Wise was lost and Paula Jean ran away, and somehow, decades later, Paula Jean is here in Virginia Butler's empty house, standing at the dead woman's stove, scraping the tea kettle to the front burner and turning on the heat. It almost seemed that Virgie had called Paul to her all those years ago, as though she had known what would come. Paula Jean studying Virgie like a specimen, until Paula Jean could impersonate Virgie as easily as she could be herself. And so easily had Paula Jean become Virgie that it seemed preordained. 3 volumes of forged correspondence, much of it between Paula Jean and Virgie, 2 posthumously discovered novels, a half dozen reissues of Virginia Butler's early work with prefaces by Paula Jean. She'd slid into Virginia Butler's place like a hand into a glove. But the publishing house has decided to send someone to pay her a visit. The letter arrived today. On our insurer's insistence, we have instituted a new standard of due diligence required to validate and photograph all of Virginia Butler's original correspondence and manuscript drafts. Apologize for the intrusion, unable to reach you by telephone. Arrive on the 23rd. Sorry for the inevitable inconvenience. Paula Jean thinks better of the tea and pours 3 fingers of whiskey into her mug. She stabs at a lemon wedge with a pointy clove stud. The back door slams open on its own. The flames beneath the tea kettle bluster and go out. Paula Jean deadbolts the door and relights the burner. Her old bones creak. It's easy to imagine it, an open door to a different lifetime, a muggy lover who's just dropped beneath the faucet of the farmhouse sink for a gulp of cold water, smelling of sweet grass and diesel, a neighbor delivering a chess pie beneath a blue gingham napkin with a wordless wave. In this life, though, it's just Paula Jean standing alone, watching steam rise, willfully shackled to this kitchen where she begged for crumbs for too many years. She had come as a girl to escape her small miseries, and then up from the floorboards grew lashes that wrapped her ankles and held her in place for 44 years. She fingers the envelope. The Boston publisher has addressed the letter to Paula Walton. They misspelled it in the first book too, missed her penciled correction, and just like that, she became P. Walton, editor, unsexed and anonymous. In retrospect, she's not sure why she let them take her name away so easily. When she was in high school, it was Wise who had given her a new name, Paul. The sound of it still felt like Wise tucking a strand of hair behind her ear. God, no, not Paul. That's no name for a writer, Virgie had said. The exasperated tone, the authority of it, as though Virgie were still standing right over Paula Jean's shoulder. Paula Jean had been filling Virginia Butler's mug, her other palm resting on the egg-slicked diner counter between them. Paula, embroidered on her waitress uniform in red script above her right breast. Fall, 1951. She had seen the leaflets in the library announcing Virginia Butler's visit to Stamford that week, had long ago memorized the contemplative pose from her author photo on the jacket. The news of the visit, then Virgie's appearance here in Paula Jean's diner, felt like a message from Wise. It had been 5 years since Paula Jean's splashy runaway from college, inspired by that book Wise had given her. 7 years since Wise had gone. I'm not a writer, Paul had said. Virgie, though she wasn't yet Virgie, she was Miss Butler, Dr. Butler, she endlessly reminded people, tipped a snowstorm of sugar into her mug and stirred the coffee with the lead end of her pencil. I think we'll see about that, she had said. Paula Jean hid her smile, a spark. The first notice anyone had paid her since she'd run away and watched her disappearance spill across the papers, since her mortified return home to Stamford 6 days later. Paul's parents had quietly shut the bedroom door behind her and called up the Stamford Advocate to persuade them to drop the story. And then nothing was ever said about it again. In that diner, after years of her parents' averted eyes, Paula Jean had felt greedy for the attention, but Virgie had lost interest in her already, was marking up a manuscript with a dampened pencil tip. This was one of the reasons why it was so easy to take over after Virgie died. No one had ever gotten to know Virginia Butler, no one but Paula Jean. Be me, Virgie would say when the telephone rang, echoing through the rotting old house, and with pleasure Paula Jean would, to the gas man, the oncologist, the editor's assistant at Virgie's publishing house. Photograph all of Virginia Butler's original correspondence and manuscript drafts. This, out of the deep blue. After 25 years at this, Paula Jean has long since stopped lying awake at night over fears of being found out. And now here is the fear, frog walking in on some Boston man's legs. After the first manuscript Paula Jean had sent to the publisher, the collected letters between herself and Virginia Butler, she had sped home from the post office in Virgie's ancient Cadillac to puke and sweat. But over time, seeing her words under Virgie's name made sense. Her life as a champion for Virginia Butler's legacy, edited by P. Walton, became its own kind of truth, its own kind of home. Paula Jean had created some of the most anthologized, beloved, and discussed books of modern times. People named their children after her characters. What further proof must that Boston man demand? Even still, it's that first novel of Virgie's over which Paula Jean feels the most ownership. It had cast a spell over her first love affair, had been the first thing she'd ever said to Marjorie Ann Wise, the swaggering painter she'd been following to art class for weeks. What is that about? Wise, sitting on the low wall outside the high school grounds, hair cut short, 3 cigarettes tucked into her bobby sock. The soft tick of Wise's wristwatch filling the silence after Paul's question. Wise closed the book without marking her place. Her fingers were short and streaked with oil paint. "You're in Lawson's 3rd period art," Wise said. She held the book out. "Get it back to me on Friday." Paula Jean had never read a book so quickly in her life. Within months, she had memorized it, as well as she had memorized every mole and mark on Wise's body, the dark hair that grew at the nape of her neck, the aluminum squeeze of happy pain she felt when Wise drove her fingers between Paul's legs. Everything, the good and bad of them, came from that book. And didn't that make it just as much Paul's as Virgie's? It did. It must. And yet Paula Jean's stack of notebooks, in which she has kept painstaking notes of her decades of fabrication, will condemn her to anyone who looks. Her own rough drafts of Virgie's letters, outlines of the posthumous novels, diagrams of Virgie's sentences. Paula Jean thumbs through them now, seeking in them some evidence of her own righteousness. Shouldn't all the work count for something? Shouldn't it prove her authority? What could be more intimate than poring over the details of another's life, than resurrecting her? Virgie didn't have to spend years studying herself, memorizing her own tics and tells. Paula Jean knows Virgie better than Paula Jean could have ever known herself. Paula Jean has constructed a legacy, and she's given every bit of the credit to a dead woman. She's barely taken anything for herself, and of course, no one has ever thanked her. But this Boston man will march in now with his camera and some bureaucratic insistence that Paula Jean prove some part of herself. He'll demand entrance into her home and her history, Virgie's history. He's coming to break them apart. Paula Jean looks at the house as he might demand to see it. Here are the letters I sent to Virgie in 1952, she'll say. I reckon they are older than you. Here is my copy of her first book, which in the end, I never even asked her to sign. Here is where I scraped molasses off the pantry floor with a nail file. Here is where I found a rat suckling her puppies, and here is the incinerator where I put them all. Here is where I pulled the waxy ends of Virgie's bob into a fist in the middle of the night as she heaved into the sink after chemo. Here is the oven with the broken pilot light, and inside are the notebooks I won't let you see because they prove my deception. Here's the dial on the cooktop that I often forget to twist completely to the right, and here is what gas smells like if you close the doors and windows tight. Here's Virgie's will, which I altered with the perfect mimic of her signature so that the probate wouldn't take the house, because that old witch died without leaving me one red cent after my decades of trouble. Here is the telephone that used to ring once or twice a week, a sound that would lift Virgie's head from her typewriter and make her say to me, be me, be me, be me, be me.
Thank you for that reading, Erin Kate. We can move forward now, if you like, with some questions that looks like have been rolling in the chat. So Maria, is there a question we can start off with?
Sure. So I have some questions here from Irv and then from Julia. So Irv's first question I think would be good to start us off with. When did you first become aware of the disappearance of Paula Jean Weldon and decide this would be a good subject for a book?
So I was working on my thesis project at Bennington for my MFA, which was not initially related to Paula Jean, but I was doing a little bit of research on a Shirley Jackson short story. And the short story is called Missing Girl. And it's not one of her famous stories. It's collected in a book of what they call uncollected fiction, which had not been anthologized prior. And it's called Just an Ordinary Day. And the story had been published in like a kid's sci-fi magazine. I mean, this is how writers made their living, particularly in the 40s and 50s, right? Like they were selling stories and making a fair amount of money pretty quickly. And it's a really fun story, particularly if you know the facts around Paula Jean's disappearance. So Shirley Jackson lived in North Bennington. Her husband, Edgar Stanley Hyman, was a professor at Bennington at the time. And the story is about a girl who goes missing from a very upscale camp in a Vermontish area that is rather rural, and really kind of puts her finger on the tension between the actual Bennington, which at the time was the most expensive college in the country. It was only for women, and they refused to teach home ec. So you have this, right? And this is 1946. So it's a kind of a big deal that they were not teaching for home ec. And then an incredibly rural farm town in Vermont that barely had paved streets. And she kind of, she really zoomed in on what the people in the camp thought about the people in the town, what the people in the town assumed about the girls in the camp. And so when I did a little bit of research, just looking to see if anyone had written about the story, I found one tiny footnote to a Wikipedia article that said it was assumed that she had written this story inspired by this real life disappearance that happened in Bennington. And that was when I started the research. I did an entire thesis project. I spent 1.5 years with the facts of Paula Jean's disappearance. It was a performance piece, so it was not written exactly. But then it just turned out she wasn't done with me. Like, I graduated, I wasn't quite sure what my next writing project was going to be. And I swear it kind of felt like she was sitting in the corner of my studio. Like, come on, we started this, we have to finish it. And the part of it that's, as I alluded to earlier, that was interesting to me was how often she fell out of the story, particularly when I spent time in the archive and got used to the shorthand that the reporters were using. They were writing about, well, we think maybe it was Bigfoot. Oh, wait, no, this really pretty model maybe saw her. So that it would be an excuse to put the model's photograph on the cover of the page of the newspaper. Just how much she fell away and how much developing theories of her disappearance and her future life became the business of not only the town, but much of the United States. And so then I thought, well, it doesn't make sense to only give her one life. Like, I don't just want to fictionalize one version of what might have happened to her, but instead want it to feel multiple. I want it to be many. Thank you for that question. I love talking about that part, obviously. So
thank you. That's let's see. So I wonder if, let's see, I'm looking at the other questions in the queue, and you mentioned archives, and we have a question about that. But maybe let's go to Julia's question. With so many themes and intertwining themes throughout the book, how and when did you decide to add the other missing girl stories and weave them together?
Those were there pretty early. I just knew that she was going to be working as a clairvoyant, looking for missing girls. Like, I knew that part of it. And Mary, so the character, she's living as a character, as she's living as Mary Garrett at that time for that particular storyline. And that's for the through line. Like, that is the chapter that we return to again and again. And there's a newspaper article that had her maybe headed to Raleigh. So I just kind of started looking. I was with Google Maps on that area of the country, thinking, okay, so what if they're a little bit right? She kind of ended up in one of the Carolinas. And I found Jones Lake, which is, or was at the time, a Black only recreation area in North Carolina. I mean, it's not going to surprise anyone to know that there was a White Lake, which was pure and clear, and that Jones Lake had tea-colored water and would stain your clothes, and they were segregated in that way. And Jones Lake is still there, and it is now an integrated recreational space, but it was an incredibly important space for the Black community of Bladen County. Baptisms happened there. I mean, it was the core of the community. And thinking about what would it mean for a northern white woman to go to the South looking for a white girl and to be in this space, that was where it kind of started to open up the broader story, where Polly would not be the only missing girl, but because of the politics at the time, maybe the politics now, Polly's disappearance would get attention, but that these two other missing girls' disappearance would not. And I also really wanted to make sure that this rich white woman who was born in 1928 had to face her own race and had to face her, like, the prejudice that would have been embedded in her. I was not gonna, I mean, part of the beauty of allowing a person to live and grow is that they have to constantly confront how wrong they are. And I wanted to give her that gift as well.
Well, thank you for that. Mary is kind of hard to like, which I think is kind of the point, right? Or one of the points.
Yeah, I mean, I would like to think that all of the versions of Paula Jean push us toward an unsympathetic view, or like an understanding of how not only how slippery the categories are that make you a missing girl worth paying attention to, and race is the largest one for sure. And like even within that, because so often people are even defined out of whiteness based on qualifications such as ability, sexuality, age, that all of them would kind of present her as someone who maybe people wouldn't go looking for. And because we're reading this book now, maybe we wouldn't go looking for Mary Garrett. She's kind of a bigot.
This question is not in the queue, but I'm I guess moderating it. So how does it feel to hold your book in your hands?
It feels very strange. I mean, I think that perhaps anyone who's worked really, really hard and then held, I imagine holding an infant, you get pure joy and you're like, I really worked very hard and now this is a living creature. This is not a living creature, right? Like it's still an object. I can put it in my bag. It's strange to think that 7 years of my life is here, because this can never represent what those 7 years were. But as I've kind of gone back into it and particularly been editing it and selecting sections to read, I've been enjoying it a little bit more, I have to say, because I've been seeing it not on a Word document on my screen. I think that helps a lot.
So we have a question here from Irv. What type of resources did you use in your research in addition to archives? And if I could just add to that, I know we talked about the availability of Black newspapers in archival research and the lack of availability, really. So if you could comment on that or address that as well, that would be great.
So in addition to news sources, I talk to a lot of people. I mean, I feel like that's kind of essential. And story, like it's been 75 years since this girl disappeared. You go to Bennington, Vermont, they remember her, or they remember people who remember her. It's a small town. It does not even have a stoplight. And so when I went to the library, I talked to the librarian, I talked to the person who was staffing the local history room. And well, it turns out that her dad had been on the Bennington police force. And he joined the police force in 1947. So it was after she disappeared, but her disappearance was still very much part of the story. And she had a theory. I went to the Bennington town library, and the man who's the curator there used to work at Bennington College, was very good friends with someone who had been one of her teachers. So they had a theory about what she had done. Talking to people is just kind of invaluable. It's something that I've learned, again, moving to a rural area, is that there's not a lot in terms of town archives. The people who hold the history are the ones who are walking down the street. I also, like, in terms of researching, I also moved my body a lot. I would say that, like, everywhere I wrote about, I went. I spent time. I got a feel for the language in each of these places. I had to fight a lot to keep some of the richer, more beautiful language that was coming from particularly the Southern characters. My editors are all from New York. I don't know the degree to which they are encountering people who have a different speech pattern than they do, but I would just say that I had spent more time there. And I, was able to defend, but had to do the work to defend the use, some of the turns of phrase. And I think that just the feeling of being by myself in an unfamiliar place, doing it often on a shoestring budget, gave me insight into these characters I was writing that I wouldn't have had if I had just stayed in front of my computer at my desk the whole time. And in terms of the archive, I mean, I would say that yes, there was just an article, someone, I think the NAACP has just purchased a lot of the archives of the historical Black newspapers and are going to be putting them online. And this is incredible. This is so important. So for instance, when I was in Bladen County, they had the Bladen County Recorder microfiche. But as you might imagine, there was not a lot of coverage of the Black members of the community. You would not get the sense that it's like 30% Black community from what was covered in the newspapers. And there was also, they didn't have yearbooks from the Black high school. And in Bladen County, the high schools were not desegregated until the mid-70s. So the total lack of record there, and of course, most of the people I was encountering were white, who were holding these like kind of gatekeeping positions, the people who, and they were all wanted to help, but didn't know how. And then I would go to the county historical societies, which are on a volunteer basis. And those are mostly the people who, like, their names would be the same as the names of the streets that I had been driving. So these were people who had long family histories. Often they started these societies because they had like a whole bunch of quilts that had belonged to their great grandmother, and they wanted there to be a place to show them off. And they also were not holding records, like even the old town maps, it would take us forever, like working together to try to locate, well, where was the Black school in this county? Because it was not identified that way. You just had to kind of know what it meant to say Spalding Monroe. And so that was, I mean, that was a challenge. And it's also a challenge that there's not enough in the archive, I think, about women. Some stuff has been written about famous women who are activists, but when I was looking for people who were born around the time of Paula Jean Weldon, I wanted to read memoirs, I wanted to read diaries, I wanted to read letters, I wanted to know what were they thinking about, what was their sensibility. And I spent hours with the public librarian in Minneapolis, and we just couldn't, like, unless you were married to a politician or you were Betty White, there was just very little. It was really difficult to find that. There was a book called The 50s by a woman named Brett Harvey, I think. Someone can double check me, but I found that to be incredibly helpful, where she just did lots and lots of interviews with all types of women of many races, women of many sexualities, just about what life was like, the expectations. And it was so interesting to me how often certain terms came back up in all of these interviews. And I started to get a sense of like, oh, this is just how people talk. Like, this is really just, these were kind of defining ideas of the era. There's a new book by a woman named Kathleen Stone called They Called Us Girls. And it is interviews with women who have chosen unusual careers from like the 1920s to the 1960s, which is in a very important book. So anyone who's doing similar research, I'll point you in that direction.
Cool. I should order that for the library. So just to add to that, if I could, libraries reflect the people who run them and the values. And some people like to think about the library as sort of this neutral space, but it's not. And unless you are intentional about being inclusive in your collections, and also access to those collections, that's how you end up with some voices being amplified while others being silenced or erased, which is kind of, I think, what you are talking about with the the lack of the absence of stuff in the archives. So I'm going to skip ahead. We have a question here from Vicky, who I believe is Vicky from high school also. Okay. Vicky says, when you finish, she says hi. When you finish like writing, I guess, is there relief or is there sadness since you've lived with these characters for so long? You mentioned earlier something about Paula Jean like kind of haunting you in your studio. So is she leaving you alone now? Do you feel sad? Do you miss her?
Paula Jean's always going to be with me, but I mean, I think it's both. I mean, the idea of ever being finished is hilarious. I mean, I was in edits for this book for many, many years, and I kept thinking I was finished with it, and then no, I wasn't finished with it. But yes, once I actually got through like copy edits and page proofs, and like for real, you can't change anything else, there was definitely a feeling of loss. I would imagine it's kind of like, it's so funny that I want to reach for like comparisons to parenting, and I'm not a person who's ever parented a child, but a feeling of empty nest, just like the primary concern on my mind for so long had been not only the work itself, but how can I arrange my day or my life or my month so that I can get to the work? How can I make sure the work doesn't fall away? How can I be constantly touching it? and that was just gone. And I had an idea of what my next project would be, but it's not easy to, make that very quick leap. So there was a little bit of sadness, and I think that I didn't identify it as that initially, but I like over time I realized that that's what that was. It's just this book was meaning making for me for many years, and when it was finished, I had to make some decisions about how I was going to make meaning for the next 7 years.
There are a few more questions here in the queue, but I wanted to make sure people who are there had any questions they want to ask.
Sherry does.
Okay.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Well, my question, I guess, is a little bit more, well, it's student facing kind of in a way, because you said that whenever you were writing your book, you were maybe you said penny pinching, but you were, kind of living on a budget. Yeah.
Sure. Yeah.
Yeah. And on a string. Okay. And so I guess, were you, looking at it from like a student's point of view, like, because that sounds like fun. I'd love to go to a different state and live there and write with my tea. And so how did you do that? Did you have like parents that supported you, or was that something you worked up to save or worked while?
This is a really good and very important question. So thank you so much for asking it, because so often how a person can do this is made invisible. So I really think it's an important question. And often the answer is, I had a partner who supported me. I had parents who supported me. I am 44. My parents are not going to pay my rent anymore. At the time that I was working on this, I had my partner and I moved to Minneapolis because he was starting a PhD program. So I shifted from, I had been working part-time as a staff member at an organization in Boston, and I shifted to being a freelancer. So I was still doing the same work. I was a little bit different the way I was getting paid, and I was getting health insurance through my partner's being a student. So that, like, without getting health insurance that way, this would have been impossible. So I want to be, so number one, everyone should get free health insurance. We understand that that is the basis, right? Everyone also should have like basic minimum in what are we calling it? Universal
Basic income.
Yes. Everyone should be able to buy toothpaste. Like these are basics, right? Like I think this is true. I've visited countries where it is true, and the amount of art people can make is amazing. So I started thinking about this selling part of my time to then give myself an artist grant for the rest of the time. It took me years to get to this mindset. I spent years and years doing the like 40-hour a week. This is how you are a grown up. You have a lunch hour, you get martinis after work. But there was no meaning in any of that for me, not really. So I did the thing that you're not supposed to do, which was I stopped working full time. I accepted that things were going to be more precarious sometimes. Like there was literally time I was selling old CDs to pay my health insurance premium. Like that has happened. But I did consulting throughout the whole thing. I started applying for artist grants. And so that's another thing I would say is really, really important, is that, again, it's something that everybody should get, and it should not just be at the whim of a few rich people. But I got artist grants through certain foundations as well as through the state. So I don't know if Indiana has a state arts board, if they are individual arts grants, but I would definitely do a little bit of research into that and see if that's possible. Unfortunately, they frequently will not give you a grant if you're still in school. Those are often meant for people who are not getting like in a degree granting institution. They're not a gigantic amount of money. It's $8,000 or $10,000. So it's not going to fuel a year, but it can give you a cushion, or it can help you pay off debt. Our car broke down at one point, and I was able to use one to help us to put that down payment on a car. Like this stuff is basic, right? Like it's not glamorous. And I'm sure that Jonathan Latham doesn't have to worry about it as much. Stephen King definitely does not. But the rest of us are figuring out, like, how are we going to buy groceries? How are we going to put gas in our car? So, I mean, I think that part of it was really just shifting my expectations for the level of comfort that I thought I could get. Leaning hard into the community that I had developed. My community was a community of artists and writers, as well as activists. We were very good at feeding each other and taking care of each other. Many people were in a similar situation where we were making sacrifices to make art or to make the life that we wanted to make. So to summarize, everyone should get what they need. Research artist grants. 40-hour-a-week jobs are not that great. Make friends and take care of them.
I have a follow-up question to that, but I agree with the make friends and take care of them. Leanne Meyer, our writing center director, has created a really cool community in our writing center. So, but with the 40-hour-a-week thing, what did you work? And then, I mean, do you think, well, I don't know. I guess I visit the Career Development Center a lot, so I'm still, don't know what I want to do.
We all don't know what we want to be when we grow up.
None of us.
Either.
Yeah. I mean, I think so you're kind of asking me what was the work I was doing. So right after I graduated from college, I went to law school and got a whole lot of student debt. Don't do that. And worked for a year as a law clerk, which is supposed to be an honor, but it's very short term. So you get a job and then you have to immediately start looking for jobs again. I worked for a few years at a law firm. It was way more than 40 hours a week. And I felt really terrible about it. I felt not like I was doing good work in the world. I knew that I was getting more boring by the day. And that was actually when I started taking community writing classes. So I was taking them at a place called Grub Street in Boston. A lot of cities have these community where it's not quite the same as like continuing ed. It's often a little more expensive than that, though many of them have scholarships. And that gave me something to focus on and to start thinking about who I was when I wasn't at this job that I really, really didn't like. I shifted to nonprofits and started doing fundraising for nonprofits, which is, if you're a good writer, really easy work. There are not that many people who do it, and it's pretty easy to become an expert. So I've basically been doing that either as a staff person or as a consultant. I have off and on worked between like 5 and 25 hours a week based on the number of clients I have and the amount of work that comes in. So either I have to try to be really calm, have some savings, and know that more work will come, or I will panic every 3 weeks, right? Like, and who knows which one it'll be at any given time. Like I said, it's precarious life choice. And I'm sure when you're like nestled in the womb of your university where your needs are kind of supported in so many ways, it's hard to imagine, baby birding out onto that tiny little limb. But I mean, the freedom that I have is really amazing. I make my own hours. I can say no to work. I can decide to I spend a lot of time at writing residencies. There have been years where I've been away at writing residencies for 6 months of the year. Like, it's my life on my terms for right now, right? Like, if Congress doesn't decide on Medicare for all or I've already forgotten it, Maria.
Universal basic income.
Thank you. Then if I get in a car accident, I'm not going to have as free of a life, right? Like, it's working for me right now, and I don't regret any of it. And I hope it can last as long as possible. But people work at jobs for 35 years and get canned with no notice. So like, there are no guarantees.
Yeah. Thank you for your answer.
Sure.
I notice Irv here in the chat says Littleville Literary Arts is committed to the idea that writers should be paid for their work. Yes, that's great.
Absolutely.
And a number of he knows of a number of artists who use Patreon for funding. I know a lot of podcasts do that. Podcasters, where people can sort of pledge to an artist or a person. Oh, I see Caleb in person as a question, so I'll mute myself. Go ahead, Caleb.
It's not really a question, more I just wanted to make a couple of comments. First off, you are very good at describing scenery. Very, very good. Without like putting in too many adjectives or anything, just, I was very impressed by that. The other thing I was impressed with was the way that you really got us into Paula's mindset and how she felt about Dr. Butler. It was incredible how quickly you were able to really show how she felt about her. I just was very impressed.
Thank you for that. I mean, I do want to say that, I mean, tell me if this is going to get too like crafty, but I mean, I teach writing a lot, so I can accidentally get too insider baseball on it. There is a line from Patricia Highsmith's Strangers on a Train, which is a thriller. Some of you she also wrote what became the movie Carol. It's called The Price of Salt. He stumbled on a goddamn cobblestone. I wrote that sentence down and put it on my wall because that book is in third person, right? And that somewhere when we were in elementary school, somebody told us that first person is how you show emotion and third person is how you neutrally describe things. And I mean, in the same way Maria just said, like, there is no neutral, right? Libraries are not neutral, narrators are not neutral. I love that sentence as the reminder that you can use third person, but whoever is telling the story still has a perspective. And so he stumbled on a goddamn cobblestone, right? Like, it tells us immediately that he's in a hurry and he's angry and it doesn't have to say any of that. And it does it without even putting us into the first person. And I think like it literally is on my wall. Like, I think about that a lot. Like, how can, with every single sentence, I put the reader into the mind of the person who's telling the story?
Well, you did a really good job of that, and thank you for reading that chapter. I very much enjoyed it.
May I just kind of jump on that for just a second? And thank you so much for being here tonight. I'm so excited that you're sharing all of this with us. As someone who gets to teach writing often, and some of my students are here, I just want to say the prologue here where you start every paragraph. On December 1st, 1946, Paula Jean Weldon put on a bright red parka, left her dorm, and it goes on. You do such an amazing job of setting us up for all the different scenarios that you're going to do without saying, okay, so this book is about this, and it's going to pretend like I know what has happened to this. Amazing prologue that sets your audience up. Well done. And when I try to get students to understand how to show me and not tell me, this is going to be one of those good examples. So thank you.
Thank you. I mean, I think that for many of us who are making art, making not even just art, right? Making life, making art that is not like center mainstream stuff. Our job is to teach people how to encounter it. Like, we just are going to have to, because our classes have not done that. Our society has not done that. There's that thing about how in France, little school children are giving really they have like a stinky cheese class. Have you guys read about this? Like, that developing the palate of children in France is like part of the core curriculum. And so they eat things that I think of as very stinky, bitter foods so that they can not be me when they grow up. And we don't have a version of that for art. We don't teach people how to encounter abstract expressionism, or at least we didn't when I was in school. And so part of the prologue was trying to teach the readers, like, what you're going to encounter is not maybe what you think. Like, this is not a crime novel, at least not one that you would recognize. So thank you for noticing that. I appreciate it.
I think Courtney had something that she wanted to ask or say.
Thank you. So I remember, as you were just commenting, Erin, Kate, I remember reading somewhere that this novel was like a play on consciousness and like perspective, and it feels, this novel feels like such a dreamscape, because it's like existing in the there, but also the what if, like simultaneously. That's just a comment. My question is, we've sort of talked about this, but in the acknowledgements, you wrote something that really struck me, and you wrote that much of this novel is a love letter to the idea of community. And we've sort of talked about this, but I'm wondering maybe if you can expand upon that, and or even how that plays out in the novel itself with the characters.
Well, Courtney, I don't want to give the whole thing away, but I mean, absolutely. It's funny, when I look back, almost everything that I have written is in some way about like, just depending on yourself, we'll get you nowhere. What you have to do is make friends and take care of them. But in some ways, I think also the different idea, like the different versions of Paula Jean as being in community, or even being in family with each other, which is, and now I'm riffing on what you said earlier about consciousness, but I've been thinking a lot lately about our memories, and we seem to be in this moment where we're having this anxiety that if we lose our memories, we lose our identity, or that we are not a full self. It's playing out in a lot of our television shows. And I actually really like the idea that like our fullest self is one that somehow is imbued not only with our full memory, but also the memories of everything that could have been. Like, can you even imagine the version of you that exists in the world if every choice you didn't make, you did, and they're all just with you? Like every potentiality is like, it's like the, whichever one it is, not Linus, the other one who has the pig pen, who always has the cloud of dust over his head as he walks around. Like all of your possible choices and selves are there with you. So you're actually never alone. You're never making a decision only for the version of yourself that exists. And I think I make jokes about it sometimes. I'm someone who cans, which makes me old fashioned. But I always think of canning and preserving food as self-care for my future self. Because in 6 months, when I get to open that can of soup and I do not have to cook, I'm very, very grateful to the version of me that had an imagination that I might need that. So in a few ways, the book is a little bit about that. Like, how can we be in community with ourselves, take care of ourselves by having this more expansive version of the self? Life is long, life is broad. But what I hope the trajectory of the book does is kind of show versions of Paula Jean, who she is when she relies only on herself, when she thinks primarily of her own safety. And of course, it's hard to not think of your own safety, right? Like I don't want her to be indicted for thinking of, taking care of herself, especially at a time which maybe we're living again, where queer people are unsafe. But that understanding our connection to people, recognizing the sacrifices that people make for us, and seeing the opportunities to sacrifice for others as also a gift is the best future I could imagine for her. So the second to last chapter of the book is really the best version of life I could imagine for her. And it is not a straightforward happy ending, but it's one where she is in a place where resilience and love and sharing and a refusal to accept the present are all there together.
Is that the lowest chapter?
Yes.
That's my favorite. So I want to address a couple of things. So one of the descriptions of this event, and I think something that our friends from the Louisville Literary Arts are interested in, something about being a Southern adjacent writer, where I come from, and Vicki is on here, and I see Matthew joined us. It's Villa Madonna Academy reunion here. Go Vixens, Vipers, and Vikings. So you're from Northern Kentucky, right? But you've lived in a bunch of different places. We're here in Southern Indiana, Louisville. So what does Southern adjacent mean to you? How does that influence or affect, well, basically everything. So
I mean, I talked a little bit about how I had to really kind of defend some of the language, particularly in the Southern chapters, with other Northern readers. So I'm going to start there and say that I think that when I went and spent a week in Elizabethtown and I stayed in kind of a crummy motor inn, I'd already written the chapter, like a significant draft. So I was accidentally living Mary Garrett's life a little bit as I did that. And I grew up in Northern Kentucky. I think that I spent some time trying to make sure that I didn't sound like I did in my 20s, because I moved from Northern Kentucky to Ohio, and then to Boston, where, as far as they're concerned, like anything south of Philly is a swamp. And took, my best friend in law school was from Louisiana. The two of us took a lot of abuse, as you might imagine, and did a lot of work to kind of make myself not stick out. I definitely felt unsophisticated. I mean, the Evie's chapter in this book is drawn very much from my experience, moving up to Boston. And I think that there were things that were kind of shocking to me when I got to Boston. There was a big bar that had just opened called Rednecks. And that was the most horrifying thing anyone could call you. It was when I left the area in like 2001, like we were all trying really hard to prove that's not what we were, that we were not that version of the South. And then we got up there and, it's the imagery is just pretty much exactly what you could imagine it was. And that felt very strange. And then there were times where I felt like I was building a bridge back to the South. After the 2004 election, there was a lot of vitriol thrown at the South as though the South is a monolith, which it is not. And so then when I went back down to Elizabethtown, I went with my accent, which sounds probably Midwestern-ish with an inflection of Boston. I found myself returning to earlier twang as I was spending time with people in North Carolina. I heard them shift the way they pronounce words in order to sound like me a couple of times, and became very conscious of just showing up. There's this power differential. Me just showing up sounding like this made a power differential, because we were, even in a straightforward interaction, me ordering a glass of wine from a kid at a winery, there was power, because we both know what the imaginary is, right, of someone from the North, someone from the South. And so then he would shift the way he pronounced a word or ask what I was doing there. And so as I was putting together my fictional version of Elizabethtown and Bladen County, I wanted to be true to the fact that it's a complicated space. Like the Obama administration investigated a lynching in Bladen County, right? Like recent, it's a complicated place. This is where people were going, and there were harvesting ballots from particularly elderly Black voters and throwing them away. That is all in recent memory. So I wanted to be true to the history of that, because it's flattening and it's an insult to not. But at the same time, I was so aware of how people in New York, people in the Midwest have this imaginary version of the South that exists in their mind. And I did not just want to regurgitate that. Like, I really wanted to find a way to say, y'all is complicated. Like, it's really, really bad when it's bad, but it also is just complicated. And it's not as straightforward. And people from Texas do not sound like people from North Carolina, do not sound like people from Tennessee, do not sound like people from Kentucky. Like, I felt a little bit like an ambassador, I guess is kind of a way I could do it, as I was trying to translate my personal history, my experience in that space, to the interactions that I had with all of these people in the publishing world who are not from that place. And I think that there were times that I leaned on my Northern or Midwestern credentials in order to make sure that I was not dismissed. And it's not something I'm proud of doing. I think that when we get into these hard spaces where everything is hierarchical, we're just trying to figure out how to survive. But that doesn't mean we're doing a service to the people who come next. So I'm trying to make sure now that I am talking about it and that I am not letting people be dismissive toward at least the chapters that take place in North Carolina, because it's an important part of the story. And I don't know, y'all, it's complicated.
It is. I want to note here in the chat, Irv says, my brother always insists that he's a Hill William, which is a cut above hillbilly, which is very funny. I think Courtney said there is someone there who has a question.
Yes, I think, did you have your hand up a second ago?
Oh, it was mainly a comment about how, like, art classes growing up, you said French, in their culture, they'll, you know, develop their palettes of on cheese. And just, I remember in art class, those same, well, I had some experiences. I mean, your art gets graded, you know, and so it's not very like cultivating of the creative process if you think, oh, this is for a grade only. So yeah, that was just a comment about what you said about creativity in art and like changing the view of the people around you on that.
Well, what is your name?
Sherry.
Sherry. Okay, Sherry, thank you because you give me an opening to be a little bit of an evangelist, which is, I love that the Creativity Club exists, and I love that the literary arts are here, because I just think, am I allowed to curse?
Go for it.
Okay. It is so fucking important to make art, no matter what anybody says. It is important to make art. If nobody sees it, nobody hears it. If you do it in the dark under the covers and you immediately burn it, like it, once the art gets out of you and into the world, you have no control over the way it's packaged or sold. If it is, you have no control over it's ignored, how people accept, but you will be a better and more interesting person for making the art no matter what. And we live in this world where everything tells us to be consumer and that we're supposed to buy the solution to every problem, even the solution to the problems that are overbuying. We're still supposed to buy a book or an organization tool or a new light bulb to fix climate change. But making art is saying, fuck that, I'm not just going to consume, I'm going to create. And once you start engaging that muscle, you just become a better citizen of the world. You're going to notice more. You're going to recognize when you're being told the same old story. You're going to start looking at like, oh, wait, who benefits when we tell that same old story? Like everything about you is going to be bigger and broader and more interesting and more exciting for making art. And nobody gets to give you a grade. You can send them to me if they try.
So I'll send them your way.
Go ahead. Sorry.
Nope. You go. I got chills.
Oh, and Sherry, by the way, is the president of the Creativity Club. We've got the president and the vice president of the Creativity Club here. And these are some wonderful questions. But as you were talking, Erin, Kate, about that, I'm just reminded, it's so fitting that it's National Library Week. And I'm always reminding people too of the fact that if we just talk about the book as an object, it's a privilege to be able to buy a book, and that you don't have to buy a book. You don't have to buy your art to enjoy it. Even though we do sort of put a lot of, I think, social capital into the ability to own, you know, like books and things like that. But it's so fitting that it's National Library Week and you just said that, because I'm constantly telling people, you know, like, get the books from your libraries. If you want to read something, like the creators are still going to get paid because the library is purchasing it. And you are saving your money so that you can put it towards things like fixing a car or, you know, going to the dentist or doing the things that so often so many of us struggle to do. So just as a librarian, I really appreciate that sort of nod to, you know, the effects of capitalism.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Oh, it looks like we have Sherry. Yeah, go ahead.
I did, yeah. No, I love what you said. I have a question for you as a budding writer. You know, I have always, same with art, that I've always felt the same way with art that I have with writing. Like it was always for academic purposes. And so like, oh, this sucks. And just recently I've really good at it. And I am not surprised. You know, I've always been creative, but that wasn't meant to sound braggy.
No, sing it.
Okay, thank you.
I can
Yes.
try it for-
Oh yeah, thanks to Leanne's persuasion. Yeah, she got me in there, and it started there. So
I had to drag her in kicking and screaming, but she's good now though.
I had to quit a job, but I'm here now.
Mhm.
But actually, that's fitting, right?
Yeah.
So it's so I have two questions specifically. One, I would love to hear about your writing process. So like, you know, when you sit down to write, kind of, I know Leanne has said that she never starts at the beginning, like she always starts in the middle or something like that. I don't know if that's just for academic purposes or.
Just depends.
So like, what's your writing process? And like, maybe what do you enjoy about it? I would love to hear that too. But then also, what are like one or two things you would tell to new writers?
Okay. Maria, you'll help me remember all of these questions.
Yes. Okay.
Okay. All right. I'm going to start the first one, which is, what is your writing process? I mean, I always knew someday someone would ask me this question. I'm not prepared an answer. I would say I write in dribs and drabs when I can. There have been times where I've been like, oh, there's only 20 minutes. There's no point in trying. But you know what? You can write a book in 20-minute increments, right? If you're patient. But I have arranged my life so that it's more likely for me to have 3 or 4 hour blocks of time. And as I said, there have been times where I've gone to residencies for almost half of the year. So I would say that so much work has happened at residencies. Like that's just flat out true. Once you are responsible for paying the gas bill and keeping track of when you have to empty the furnace filter and then also doing your laundry, then the dog needs to be walked and then someone has to eat dinner, but then did you go to the grocery store? Like the amount of stuff that you have to keep track of just balloons so much more than I ever anticipated. I really thought I was going to be just a manic pixie dream girl who basically didn't care about life, but it turns out that it's kind of unavoidable. It can be really hard to get yourself into the mind space. So I frequently have found that I do a lot of sketching of ideas, and I do a lot of that by hand. Like I have a sense, I know what a scene is going to be. I have a notebook. I asked myself I have like 30 notebooks. And so I'm always losing the one I want. But where I ask myself, I'm like, oh, wait, no, ask yourself this question in this paragraph. Or what if your scene does this? And so I kind of will go to a residency with all of that where I can do, I mean, I think of it as like a deep knee bend. Like you finally can like find the stretch needed to actually kind of turn it out. Because once I have the time and space, I can write pretty quickly. Mm-hmm. And I tend to write better in the afternoon, like no matter what time I start, even if I get up at 5 a.m., I'm going to be on the internet until about 2 in the afternoon. And that's when the writing will start. Sometimes I can listen to something while I'm writing, but most of the time I cannot listen to music. I cannot have someone talking to me, or I cannot get into the space. Music, I know a lot of writers can do that, but it's the same muscles that I use, like the same brain space that I use to get into characters. And I'm a writer who writes on rhythm. I like really write with my ear. So if there's music, it's too distracting. All right, what do I like about that? It's cheaper than booze. Flat out. It when you're in the space, when you're working, when you have that sweet spot of like, I had the idea, I've fluffed the idea up enough that I think that there's something there. I'm doing the work of putting the sentences on the page. I like my sentences. Like that space feels really good. Mm-hmm. And it's kind of the cheapest way to get that feeling, I think. It feels like I'm creating in a world where I'm, like it just feels like pure making, in a way that, sometimes kneading bread can make me feel that way. Sometimes being in my garden can make me feel that way, but like moving my brain or my mind in a way that feels like it's creating something new, just that's what I love about it, I think. All right, what was the other part of the question, Maria?
Advice for new writers?
Don't listen to the haters. Get through your first draft as quickly as you can, because there's no gold star for good first drafts. First drafts are supposed to be shitty. The shittier, the better. First drafts should go in 3,000 different ways. Perfect. Because then later you get to go back and pick which one of those is the best one. And hey, guess what? I'm going to say make friends and take care of them, because a writing community is so important, and especially a writing community that will grow with you. I'm really, really lucky. I have multiple writing groups. One that we have been meeting since I think 2008. And it's 4 of us, and we know each other's work. We've seen each other's work change significantly. We will encourage the weirdest aspect of each other, because we don't care if when anybody sells anything. We just want to read what's in each other's brains. And that writing group has also been a source of so many other things for me throughout that time. And you're going to get better by reading and critiquing other people's work. It's just true. Like your writing will get better as you encounter other people's first drafts, because you're going to do the very thoughtful and generous work of engaging with somebody's early thinking, doing the work to try to understand the story they're telling, and help them get to the next draft. And as you do that work, you're going to start seeing like, oh shoot, this is what I need to do to get to my next draft. Like it's annoying. It's like one of those things that like practice actually makes you better at stuff. Like it's so annoying. You don't want it to be true, because you're like, no, I just want to start out being good, but it's just true.
Good advice. Thank you.
Julia, well, she had a question that I think got answered about writing in silence or a writing ritual. And then Julia also says, do the characters talk to you, or do you write without the characters talking, or do they drive the book, or was it your research?
Oh, that's good. I gotta chew on that. Give me a second, Julia. I would say that I take a lot of inspiration from the research, because it opens possibility. Like, and I think it's maybe because I'm just a person who really loves immediacy. So I want to place myself in whatever scene it is that I'm reading. If it's an old newspaper article, if it's a Wikipedia article, like I want to place myself there. So the research does a lot for me. And I'm also someone who loves puzzles. Like I like things that recur. I love TV shows that people like post on fan boards about for years because they have theories. Like I love that stuff. And I feel like the research can really fuel that, because it introduces brand new ideas. And particularly with this book, I think, with each of the chapters kind of spinning out from a newspaper article I had found. There was one that I could not get the legal permissions to include in the book, but there was a woman who escaped from a mental institution in Connecticut, walked into their newspaper office and said, "I'm Paula Jean Weldon," and pointed at the editor and was like, "Daddy." And of course, there was a photographer there to snap her photo as she's looking like this. And that inspired an entire chapter, because I thought, well, what if that was Paula Jean Weldon? What if they had put her in an institution and she got out? But I think that over time, the characters live with me a lot in my head. I mean, Maria and I have chatted. Maria's read many drafts of this book, but she knows that Martha in this book is one of my favorite characters. I think that Ruth, who is in the second to last chapter, is one of my favorite characters. And they're not based on people I know necessarily, but they become real enough for me. And then I feel a responsibility to them to make sure that they are fully human and that they do things that I don't necessarily expect them to do. Sometimes they open their mouths and I'm actually kind of surprised by what comes out.
So we're starting to near the end of our time together, and Courtney, I don't want to cut off anyone there, so make sure to have someone jump in. I just wanted to point to one more question in the chat that I think I accidentally scrolled over from Irv. Do you have a theory of what happened to Ms. Weldon? Or is really that's the whole book for your theories?
There's so much more information on this case that did not make it into the book. I don't know. I mean, any theory I have would be assuming that the information is real, like is true. Like the very basis of the myth that she put on a bright red parka and left her dorm room after she worked a shift at the student services in the dining hall. It was December 1st. It was the Sunday after Thanksgiving. She had not gone home for Thanksgiving for some reason. But it's her roommate who told the cops, who told that that's what had happened. So in fact, like I feel like there's such a universe of things that could have happened to her. I mean, I do want to think that she's like kicking it on an island somewhere. I would love to think that she has read the book and hates it and plans to sue me. Like what I want from her is just for her to have had a full, unexpected, mundane, amazing life, that she just got to be a person. I don't even know. At this point, I'm so saturated with possibilities. I don't know that I could pick one for what I actually think it was.
Courtney, is anyone there wanting to add or ask a question?
Yeah, thanks, Maria. I think we have one.
So do you interview your characters?
Do I interview my characters?
To see what they would say? Sometimes they may surprise you.
Yeah, that's an exercise I assign to students frequently. I do a lot of free writing for dialogue blocks, which I think is kind of a version of that. And I think Julia asked earlier about how the other missing girls kind of made their way into the story, and all of that is true. And the more specific way they did was that I had Martha's character, who she's many things, but in Mary's mind, she's the housekeeper at the motel, right? Mary has kind of distilled her down to that function. But she walks into Mary's hotel room, and I knew that much was going to happen. And then I just let Martha talk. And Martha told me. Martha was the one who said, there are these missing girls. Nobody's paying attention. You think you're so special. Why don't you prove it? Yeah, so I guess the answer is yes, I do kind of interview them.
Thank you. Let me also say that I've really enjoyed your book. I found it to be a complex, multi-layered mystery, and your visual image of putting all the notes and the dots up on the wall. I can see it being a very large wall.
Yeah, I have all of those printed out in my basement. It's a large wall.
And including the newspaper articles really adds a perspective as well as a touch of realism to it.
Thank you. I feel very, very, I mentioned that there was, a newspaper article I wasn't able to get permission for. And, this is where I'll say again, this is why libraries are essential, because they make information available for free. And people who own the rights to newspaper articles have there's nothing obliging them to sell you the rights to reprint them. But the one place you can always find them is at your library. And in fact, the Bennington Banner, which very graciously gave permission to borrow so heavily from the record, they don't even have their own archives. It was the Bennington Public Library. It's the only place that you can find them. So I spent a couple of very long afternoons huddled over the microfiche there.
If I could just interject here, those of you who enjoy audiobooks, I encourage you to find the audio version, which I've been listening to. There are 3 voice actors, readers, and the reader who does the newspaper portions has like the perfect, like old-timey news reading voice. It like really like gets you right there in like a 1941, 1940, whatever newspaper article kind of feel. So check with your public library. I currently have the LFPL one checked out, so you probably can't get that one, but check elsewhere if you want to.
If you do want to buy it, I would encourage you to buy it from Libro FM and not, I'll just say I would encourage you to buy it from your local bookstore. Like Carmichael's probably sells it through Libro FM.
Yeah, thanks for that. Yeah, not to support local if you would like to own a copy. And I just was thinking about your comments about archives and libraries. And one of the things I love to do is dig through the newspaper articles. I'm usually looking for like ghost stories and spooky things. But one really great database that anybody can get to, regardless if you're affiliated with a library or not, is the Chronicling America newspapers from the Library of Congress, which actually, if you type in Paula Weldon in that database, you will find some of these sources that are in Erin Kate's book. And it's just always a really fun, creative activity to read through, and I can't help but wonder, when is the last time that someone read this person's name or was aware of this person or had them in their mind? And it's like a way of like, speaking about ghosts, it's like a way of resurrecting someone or some event, especially like what you were saying, the more mundane air quotes, people who might otherwise be forgotten. So it was just a comment.
I mean, Courtney's going to make me cry, because one of the things that I find to be just the biggest bummer about life is that people die and then someone forgets them. Like, I think that is horrible. I think that it is a tragedy. I understand that it is mostly unavoidable, but the idea that you walk through a cemetery and nobody alive knows who these people were, nobody knows what they were allergic to or what their favorite color was, or if they had a lisp or if they were a real asshole. And I do think that there's just something we live in this moment where people are really being pushed to be ahistorical, to like pretend that we don't have a context for everything that is happening in the news. Like, we're always attached to our history, and being a witness, even meaning walking through an old cemetery and reading the names out loud, which is something that I do regularly, or dipping back into the newspaper, looking at the advertisement. Like, you're going to learn so much about this moment by reading anything that happened 100 years ago. Again, just make yourself as interesting as possible. But it's just such essential context for being a person. Also good ghosts, for sure.
Yeah, and I appreciate like what you just said. I really thought the inclusion of the archival materials was just a really fascinating inclusion to help your readers like pick up the story. Like, if they're interested, they can like just keep researching. And looks like Caleb has a question here.
Just real quick, I wanted to know if you ever took on the persona of your characters.
You mean like going method, kind of?
Yeah, I do that a lot when I write, so I was just wondering if you did it.
I mean, occasionally I would do things like listen to, Benny Goodman is mentioned a lot in the book as just kind of a touchstone. And I would listen to Benny Goodman before I wrote. I think that my speech pattern sometimes shifted to sound a little bit more like what I was writing, because I was particularly in revision where you're really just so immersed in the material. But I think that, I mean, when you said that, what I thought immediately was just because I mentioned earlier, researching with the body, which I think is so important. When I was in Elizabethtown and was feeling a little fish out of water, feeling a little bit like my own character, Mary Garrett, and I was there for a week. So I was consistently interacting with the same people, the family that owned the motel. And I would leave my motel and then come back in the mid-afternoon. And every day my bed would be made and there would be the impression of a fist right near the pillow. And I wrote that into the book because it took me a moment to realize that was the person who was making the bed, who was using their fist to lean over and like tuck the bedspread up to the far side of the bed. And it was just such a, I mean, talk about ghosts, right? Like, I mean, it's just such an indication of presence, but it's also an indication of labor that is invisible, right? Like, and I think that in some ways there was a way that, I don't know, my characters taught me to start noticing a little bit more.
I completely understand what you mean. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
But on that note, if I may jump in, when I read that gave me a real sense of being there. A simple little thing like that, which probably is not all that important to the plot, if at all, but it made the whole incident feel real, and therefore the entire book developed took on an additional stigma or of realism, which touched me personally.
I think that's so much of creating, and because I don't want to just say writing, right? Because what does writing mean? Like making story, however we make story, whatever kind of art we use to make story, or not even art, whatever mechanism by which we make story and make meaning. Being an observer is part of the way that we create worlds for people, like really understanding exactly how much detail you need to give to create a scene without overwhelming someone. People talk about the well-observed detail. And I think that that's part of just the practice of being an art maker or story maker, is noticing those things and jotting them down into one of your 30 notebooks that you will then immediately lose.
I want to ask you, Erin, Kate, how people can follow you, and so they can stay up to date with all the stuff about this book and also anything that is next for you.
I am a lazy Twitter user, but you can definitely follow me on Twitter. It's just my name, Erin Kate Ryan. I'm really excited to say that I just planned 2 more library events because I fucking love librarians. So I'm going to be at the Bennington, Vermont Library, as well as the Stamford, Connecticut Library, both of which were libraries that were immensely helpful writing this book. And so information about those and a couple of other online events I will certainly be gritting my teeth and promoting myself on Twitter.
Well, I can't say thank you enough for being here, and for the students that are here and everybody here who has drummed up such amazing conversation. This is always, for me as a librarian, one of the most magical parts about books is the communities. Your book brought us all here together tonight and had this conversation, and that's magic. I also want to say thank you to the Creativity Club. Thank you to the Louisville Literary Arts. Thank you to my colleague and your longtime friend, Maria Accardi. And I just want to create any space for any final comments or anything before we end our time together.
Does that include me? Can I make one more comment?
Yes.
I've been talking so much, my throat hurts. But I know that Irv had mentioned he was going to ask what I'm working on next, if I was open to it. I just want to say, yes, I'm open to it. So I'll just ask the question for you and then answer it. Because it is also something that I discovered while I was doing research in the New York Times archives. In 1925, there was a nightclub on the top floor of a hotel in Boston. And on July 4th, it collapsed because so many people were doing the Charleston at the same time. And so that is the novel that I'm going to be working on next. And I just wanted, because it's a, you know, the magic that we discover when we dip back into history, it's just so rich.
That's awesome. I love that. I'm gonna write a book too, and I'll send you what I write.
Yes, please.
I'm gonna say that we were on the top floor of the IUS library. We were doing the wobble and it collapsed.
Good job.
I love that. I love it. Thank you for sharing that preview too. That's so exciting.
Yeah, congratulations. That's cool.
Yes. Well, thank you again for just sharing with us your time and your energy and your expertise tonight. A huge thanks again to the co-sponsors, Louisville Literary Arts and Creativity Club. We look forward to more collaborations in the future. And just a huge thank you again to Erin and Kate for being here with us. Thank you so much.
My absolute pleasure. This was so much fun, guys.
And good luck with your next lectures and conversations. I'm sure they'll be just as amazing as they were tonight.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.